Nick!
Nick!
Yay! Oh man, I'm feeling so good. I feel really confident that we're not only going to stop this from expanding, we're going to shut it down. And we're not just going to shut this down, we are going to stop all fossil fuel from coming through our communities. We're going to hold a thin green line here on the West Coast that crumbles the fossil fuel industry on this continent. We're not going to stop there because this is not just about fossil fuels. This is not just about climate change. This is about radically transforming our economy and our society so that our sole focus is not just profit. It's not about profit for the pharmaceutical companies. It's not about profit for the health insurance companies. It's not about profit for Nike. It's not about profit for Coca-Cola. It's not about profit for the corporations at the expense of the health of us and our communities. This movement is about justice. We're not going to settle for solutions that let the people who created this crisis profit off of fixing it.
That's right!
We're not going to settle for solutions that tell us that some children, black, brown, poor, have to breathe toxic air so that other children can buy things they don't need to make more money for corporations.
It's easy to think that this Green New Deal is this thing that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to write and it'll get passed. We just need to elect the right people in 2020 and it's this federal thing and it'll be cool. But that's not what the New Deal was and that's not what the Green New Deal is going to be. Yeah, it's going to be us! Ballot measures and resolutions, helicopters.
Lots of helicopters.
At the federal level, at the state level, and at the city level. It's going to be called or branded the Green New Deal. So last November we passed the Clean Energy Fund, which wasn't called the Green New Deal, but it has all the hallmarks of a Green New Deal. People with the money, they put that money into green infrastructure and awesome equity and racial justice outcomes, and it created a bunch of new jobs. That's what a Green New Deal was, is, and so we have this transportation opportunity that is effectively a Green New Deal for our transportation in the metro region. So Metro right now, the 7 councillors, commissioners, whatever, councillors are writing a ballot measure along with a 35-member task force that's going to be on the ballot in November. And it's going to be $20 billion for transportation infrastructure. Now this could be a Green New Deal of $20 billion to create awesome jobs for people, create great infrastructure, get rid of a bunch of bad stuff, and heal racial injustices that happen in Poland, that Sarah talked about. And Mark's on the task force, so is Chloe Daly, a few of the good people, but it could also not be a Green New Deal. Right now, it seems like they're looking for a more of a middle way, a more Joe Biden version of the Green New Deal instead of an Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, awesome thing. So it could be $10 billion for like good public transit, bicycle, and pedestrian infrastructure, awesome like racial justice, economic justice solving, and then $10 billion for more roads, more cars, more fossil fuel infrastructure. They might think that 50-50 is a good split, but spending $10 billion on fossil fuel infrastructure in 2019 isn't just climate denialism, it's a death sentence for our generation.
No. We have all the tools that we need.
Yes, yes, we do.
Right.
Yes.
Climate change is not just a crisis. It's an incredible opportunity to create a world that we actually want to live in. come here alone.
I do not come here alone.
I carry my people in my bones.
I carry my people in my bones.
I do not come here alone.
I do not come here alone.
If you listen, you can hear them in my soul.
If you listen, you can hear them in my soul.
Together. I do not
Come here alone.
I
carry my people in my bones.
I do not
Come here alone. If you listen, you can hear them
in my soul. Yeah!
When they lay a pipeline, they have to deforest the entire route of the pipeline, and then they have to keep it deforested for the entire lifeline of the pipeline. But a lot of these kids from Denton, they took to the trees and they set up an Ewok village, they called it. Some of them called it Middle Earth, and they set up and lived in the trees for 6 months and blockaded the destruction of those trees for the right-of-way for the pipeline, and they prevented the pipeline from being built for over half a year. So there's all different kinds of things you can do. You can ride your bike, you can go to city hall meetings, you can do direct action. It takes everything.
So we live in extraordinary times. We are facing the single greatest existential threat that humanity has ever faced in our history. And yet, we continue to have the fossil fuel industries and their apologists at every level of government seemingly trying to speed our demise. It's as if they have another planet to move to.
Right.
Maybe David.
Oh, yeah, Amazon.
Instead of dropping all the petty things that they do and behaving in the way we did when we were attacked in World War II,
That's right.
our captains of industry, our president, and most of our Congress are acting as if nothing is amiss.
That's right. Boo, boo.
Viewed from the outside, it must look like they are actively trying to end all life on this planet.
They're arsonists.
Both ours and the amazing creatures we share this beautiful globe with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how do you explain this?
Boo.
How do you explain their desire to drill in the Arctic? How do you explain their desire to build more pipelines and more freeway miles?
Death cult.
The current raft of leaders put Nero to shame. At least he wasn't helping the invaders. He was just playing some music.
Right.
It is time, it is past time for decisive action. We must cease all new fossil fuel development of all. We must cease all subsidies for all fossil fuels. We must put a price on carbon, and we must enact the Green New Deal that addresses the climate catastrophe like the all-encompassing emergency that it is. We need to mobilize and invest like we did at the start of World War II. We have 1 decade. 1 decade. Thankfully, the youth are stepping up.
Yeah.
They are stepping into the vacuum of leadership that currently exists. And we must join them, and we must support them with every fiber of our being.
They're only moving it faster. They're only moving it through. But with the expansion that they have planned, there will be so many oil trains moving through that it will be akin to 1/10 the size of the Line 3 pipeline that they want to build in Minnesota. So this is huge. This is our pipeline resistance right here. So I'm going to pass it over.
So you can't sit on the concrete barriers. Got to be well on the side of them.
So what we're seeing is a new strategy, a new revolutionary tactic by the oil and gas industry to try and move the tar sands out of Alberta. And you can see this in the investment portfolios. They'll say, oh, because of climate change and oh, because of, you know, advocates and because of protesters, it's no longer as lucrative to build pipelines. We may not be able to build new pipelines. So they try and expand them. That's what we have in line 3, where they're trying to expand an existing pipeline to basically increase the output of the tar sands heavy crude. Hey everybody. So at the same time, what we're seeing in Portland is tar sands by rail. So tar sands by rail is more expensive. I think it has to do with just everybody else who uses the rail lines. You have to, I mean, you can see right here that they have to wait for their storage. So a pipeline would just be pumping straight to a refinery, but oil trains have to be brought to a facility like this one and individually unloaded. As Nick points out, this is the sacred footprint of the tiny house that stood right here when activists, actually this is the garden, excuse me. You see the hay, and this is from the Earth Day rally. There was a tiny house right here. It was eventually impounded, but for a little while there was a beautiful garden and there's a beautiful rally. Tar sands is particularly heavy in sour crude. I mean, in the sour component of crude, which is sulfide, and it's also so thick that they have to add dilutants to it, which are things that make it flow. So that's like methane is one of the dilutants, and we actually read that in this batch of tar sands crude being brought in, there's hydrogen sulfide added, which is an asphyxiant, and you can't smell it, so it's an asphyxiant without you even knowing it.
There's a fault line that runs under Highway 30 out there. This soil will liquefy, and the contents of these tanks, many of them, are going to be subjected to such stress that they're probably going to crack, explode, burn, leak, and who knows what kind of catastrophe you'll have when suddenly not only do you have individual facilities that are failing, but they're failing in concert with all sorts of other facilities. So it could be a disaster of proportions that the city hasn't seen before. You can see sort of like the yellow parts of these new platforms. That's the new unloading platform. Zenith calls it a modernization project, and essentially they sold it originally to the city on the basis of, oh, we're just making safety upgrades, don't worry, this is all good and all the rest, and they believed them at first. Unfortunately, the city was like, oh, okay, that sounds good, and many staffers in the city were granting permits and making trades, like I said before, and so part of our advocacy has to, let's say, convince them to not be stupid anymore, and to say, okay, every time you start to see these permits come through in the industrial area that look anything like oil or gas infrastructure, take a much deeper look at that. Collect permits not only for the site at the place, but what's going on across the street. Is it possible that this facility could build a pipeline under the right-of-way and use McCall's facilities down here to do extra storage? We don't know. It could be. And if nobody is paying attention to that and thinking on that comprehensive level, a lot of infrastructure that's not currently being used for oil export could be brought into that, and it would still maybe like technically survive our code, but be wholly inconsistent with a lot of the policy pronouncements that have been made in Portland over the last few years. So part of that's on us, but part of it is also on motivating the city to basically not be suckers anymore, to like see this as a collective thing. Emergency managers in the county don't actually think that these are retrofittable in a way that will make them resilient in the face of those types of earthquake events. So what I think is going to happen is the more data that we generate on these facilities, it's going to be very obvious that we only have one choice, and that's a managed decline of all of this fossil fuel infrastructure. And so now is time to start laying the groundwork for that narrative, and we'll basically continue to get evidence along the way to make that happen.
Pobre tantito